Good morning. I'm back to my usual morning pattern for creating my podcast. I'm happy about that. It's another gorgeous day here in Maryland. Going to be 80 and bright and sunny. And I had a fabulous weekend with family and friends, so it's about as good as it can get. Okay, so today is a podcast. Oh goodness, I keep looking at the picture on the screen instead of at the camera. Okay, so today is Popcast 42. It's part three of the evolution of the gift of each other. Uh, Yesterday we were talking about the book by Terence Deacon called The Symbolic Species. The subtitle, The Coevolution of Language and the Brain. And there's no point in me uh, not displaying this. It's a lovely book. The uh, Yesterday we covered his basic idea that we began living as bonded pairs in society about 2 million years ago. Our ancestor species did. Of course, we humans didn't come into existence until a couple of 100,000 years ago in our modern form. Um, and just continuing with more discussion of that, including giving you some of the evidence that he offered in support of his contention. Um, and so, by way of background, Deacon is using uh, the Darwinian theory of natural selection for his basic approach. So everything he talks about is in terms of whether there was a selection benefit that would drive evolution in one direction versus another. And so when he discusses that we began to live in bonded pairs in society, he shows why selection pressure is against that combination, and that somehow we were able to overcome that difficulty that, of both of those two things occurring together that are inherently in conflict with each other, uh, living in bonded pairs on the one hand and living in social groups on the other. And his contention is that we were able to do so because we evolved a psychology that was complex enough to allow us to communicate abstract thoughts through language. And so he's, working that point all the way through. Um, and so now today we're going to talk about a couple of important pieces of the evidence involving changes in dentition and in sexual dimorphism. Now, we don't really care that much about either of those things, but we do care that Deacon is making a statement that several million years ago people began living socially um, and in bonded pairs. So this is a way that I'm offering evidence for my contention um, that we're an extremely social species and that we have been that way for a long time. And in that way, we are a gift to each other. And so that's why I'm talking about Deacon. But in order to appreciate that Deacon is really worth something in support of my contention that we are a gift to each other, I have to show you some of the evidence that Deacon offers in support of his argument. As I said yesterday, the book is highly regarded. Um, One thing to mention, forage. Yesterday I misspoke and I used forage incorrectly. A forage just means any wide searching for food. And in the time period we're talking about, there was gathering and there was there began to be hunting, but both are foraging, and so we speak of hunter-gatherer societies. They're foraging societies, but before they were hunter-gatherers, they were just gatherers. Um, Nevertheless, both hunting and gathering fit within the word forage. So a foraging ecology was the situation of humans in the time period in question. We're going to go back to about 2.5 million years ago for today's conversation, because at that time there was a ancestor species called Australopithecus, and it still was very sexually dimorphic. Now let me explain. So dimorphism just means a different size, a physical size as a typical frame. So sexual dimorphism means there's a difference between male and female size on typically. And while there still persists some sexual dimorphism among modern humans, um, it was a lot more substantial in this in our ancestor species, and that big sexual dimorphism uh, was still present in this ancestral species, the Australopithecine. Pithecine, oh heck, Australopithecus, uh, and pardon me. um, at the same time, in spite of this male-female size difference, which is normally associated with um, male aggression, male competition, physical competition for females. Um, the Another key characteristic of male aggression is huge molars. Try it again. Huge canines. So the canines are the teeth that come down with the point, and the molars are the flat grinders. Now, the reason this dentition matters is in the time period in question, from about 2.5 million years ago to 2 million years ago, our canines evolved to be much smaller. And the reason seems to be that we were eating more foods that needed a lot of grinding in order to sustain us. And the grinding is done by the molars. The molars, when they grind, need to go sideways as well. And the canines aren't happy with that if they're large. It will cause them to have harm done to them, and it makes it difficult to do grinding effectively. So selection pressure in changes in our diet led to the significant change in the size of our canines. And and the at the same time, um, we had developed tools. Our brain size had changed with Australopithecus and other ancestor species, and we became more facile. Um, and we became tool users, tool makers, and so the change in our dentition made us less skillful at hunting and killing as an individual activity, and made it more appropriate for us to hunt in groups in order to be successful. And so our hunting in groups turned out to be quite a winner and allowed us to bring a good deal of meat home. Our tool using allowed us to butcher the meat and bring it home instead of just the male scourging on the results of the hunt. And so that changed everything, is this point. The, the, the change to meat as a substantial factor in the everyday diet of the human species caused an enormous social upheaval. And he phrases it, I'm going to quote this exactly. Um, he says it does not have to do with cognitive difficulties of hunting or the use of communication or increased intelligence for tool making. What is important about this shift to a novel food source is the unprecedented demands it placed on the whole fabric of social group organization. So he's saying, in order to take advantage of this hunting skill, um, and the tool skill that allowed us to butcher the meat, you've got to provision the females who are childbearing and who therefore can't successfully hunt for themselves and whose capacity to gather is somewhat reduced. Um, so that now we have males provisioning the reproducing females, and Darwinian natural selection pressure, is greatly in favor of that because it increases the reproduction of the species and strengthens the species. But for males to provision females, then there has to be arrangements about group living that the male and the female are pair bonded. Um, and at the same time, the cooperation needed for both hunting and gathering uh, meant that they had a pair bond in society, which has this enormous conflict that his main point is could only be solved by the evolution of the capacity for abstract communication. He explained that in some other species, some of this kind of problem is solved by pheromones, but our sense of smell is inadequate to use pheromones, so we had to develop the capacity for abstract communication. You have to support the abstract idea of a pair that's bonded, and the society has to understand and support the idea of a bonded pair in order for the the conflict between pair bonding on the one hand and living socially on the other to be managed. So that's more than enough for one day. We'll talk tomorrow about reciprocal altruism, and we'll keep working this book for a while because it's got a lot of good stuff. Okay, thanks. Take care. Bye bye.